Well, greetings to all you folks here today, and certainly to you folks out there that may listen to this later. I thought long and hard about the subject I want to speak on today. As a matter of fact, I struggled with the idea for about 3 days before I even decided to do this. For some folks would say it's something which should not be addressed from the pulpit. And no, it's not politics. But as ministers, it is our obligation to address things that are of Satan the devil and that are destructive to God's people and to whoever may be, listen. But you people here today are all mature, I think. And I think most of you folks out there are mature as well, consist of mature people. When someone becomes addicted to what I want to speak about today, it can become addictive. It can be devastating to their lives. It could bring devastation to their entire families. And it can lead to great evils, such as rape and torture and even murder if it is left unchecked. And yes, it can even affect God's people. First of all, let's go to Hebrews 13:4. Hebrews 13:4 says marriage is honorable and all, and the bed undefiled. But whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Now, the translators put this as mildly as they knew how to put it, I suppose. But it's saying sexual relations, and I'm putting it as mild as I know how to put it as well. It says sexual relations is a gift which God has given to those people who truly love one another. People who are dedicated to one another. People who are dedicated in their desires for one another. For if two people are truly dedicated to one another, and only to one another, then the rest will come naturally. But what happens when one steps outside the bounds of true dedication for another person of the opposite sex? And I want to stress the phrase opposite sex here, for we'll address the flip side of that a little later on here. There is one pronounced thing which brings about the forsaking of the bed undefiled, among other things. And that is the subject of my sermon today. It is called pornography. But what is pornography? The dictionary says, number one, it is obscene literature or photography having no artistic merit. Number two, it says it is the writings about harlots, and that can be male or female. There are male prostitutes as well as female. But what about the age before photography? Some folks say, was there no pornography then? Well, yes, there was. The Greeks and the Romans were famous for their pornographic statues, many of which have existed right on down to our modern day. The word pornography comes from two Greek words, porno, which means harlot, and graphia, which means the depictions of and the activities of harlots. So in common parlance, or manner of speaking, it means material that is sexually explicit and intended primarily for the purpose of sexual arousal. Now, that's what the dictionary says. I read you what the dictionary says. And that is partially right. But can we conclude that that is all there is to it? Or is there a deeper underlying purpose for it? Why does it really exist? And who was it initially inspired by. And I hope I can answer that for you before I'm through today. So why pornography? Can we really conclude that a man or a woman needs an outside stimulus to excite him or her? You know, man created female and he created male to have a natural affection towards one another, or a natural attraction. Genesis 1:27, if you want to jot that down, Genesis 1:27 tells us, it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. He didn't create two men to be together, didn't create two women to be together. No, he created a man and a woman. Both were created in the image of God. But, physically speaking, there were some differences. And I'm quite sure all of us here today and all of you folks out there know what those differences are. But why a man and why a woman with all their physical differences? Verse 28 here in Genesis 1. It says, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth. So one of the reasons God created male and female was so they could procreate. That is how God is building his family here on this earth, creating more and more human beings as potential, with the potential to be born as spirit family members in his kingdom. Two men can't do that. Two women can't do that alone. It's got to be a man and a woman with all their physical differences. But that's not the only reason. That's not the only reason. When a man and a woman who truly love each other come together, and again, that's as mildly as I know how to put it, it's not always to procreate. It's a gift God has given them to show their ultimate affection for one another by giving themselves to one another. For a man and a woman don't have to love each other to procreate. And that's a sad thing, for most of the procreating in today's world is not done by two people who truly love one another, as it should be. God created male and female with a natural attraction, as I've already mentioned, towards one another. So we should naturally be attracted to one another without the need of an outside stimulus. So to conclude that a man or a woman needs a stimulus to excite him or her would be a lie. God has not created us that way. Oh, but pornography is art, right? That's what a lot of people say. Pornography is art. Well, this is just their way of deluding their own minds and to make an excuse for what they're doing. That's what the Greeks and the Romans take on it was too. They carved out all these explicit statues, leaving nothing to the human imagination, and they placed them throughout the public domain for all to see. And they called it art, when in fact it was nothing more than old world pornography. So pornography is nothing new. It's been around for centuries. As a matter of fact, I imagine it's been around since the beginning of mankind. But how can we conclude that two people engaged in sexual acts which degrade or humiliate each other be called art? How can we possibly say that? Such thinking can only pollute and distort our values and corrupt our view of the opposite sex, male or female. Now, that being said, some folks say, but, God created us without clothes. That's a fact, He did. We all came into this world without clothes. Adam and Eve were naked, they can conclude, when they were created, so what's all this uproar about nudity? If God wanted us to wear clothes, He would have put clothes on us when we were born. That's their take on it. These statements are often used by people who justify themselves viewing pornography. But the problem, there's a problem with this idea. The idea that God created Adam and Eve without clothes and that nudity is okay. There's a problem with that. It's the idea, this idea is incomplete. It's true. God did create Adam and Eve without clothes, as the rest of us. They walked through the garden in the nude. That is, until they sinned. What people want to forget is that sin entered into mankind's life, and it's that sin which changed everything. Nudity in the Garden of Eden was good and wonderful before they sinned. But once sin entered their lives, by deciding for themselves what is right and wrong and rejecting God, nudity took on a whole new perspective. No longer could a woman walk around in the nude because it caused men to begin to lust, and vice versa. And lust leads to action, which leads to more sin. That is the problem with pornography. It's all about lust. Women and men posing in provocative ways to cause someone to look upon them with lust. That's what it's about. And this lust leads many people down the wrong paths, the path of total destruction. It causes men to leave their wives. It causes wives to leave their husbands. It can divide the family and leave children to be left in divided homes. And worse yet, it can lead to the lusting after the children themselves. Pornography, folks, is a terrible thing. It is subtly addictive, like its creator, Satan the devil. For Satan is behind it all. Satan is the reason for pornography, for it's by Satan that sin entered the world, through Adam and Eve, by whom he subtly convinced to take of the wrong tree. But is there any hope for people who are addicted to pornography? Yes, there is. The Apostle Paul says in Philippians 4, 7 through 8, Philippians 4, 7 through 8 tells us the way to overcome any sin, whatever it may be, and to restore in ourselves a sound mind. Let me see. I'm talking and I need to be in Philippians. One moment, please. You folks are already there and I'm dragging behind. Philippians 4. Y'all have already read it. I'm still not there. 4, 7. It says, "And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of a good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Therefore, if we engulf ourselves in the Word of God and the work of God, our hearts and mind will be guarded against such things." That's what it's saying. And if we don't dwell about such things, then there's the old saying, idleness is the devil's workshop. And there's a lot of truth to that statement. But if we keep our minds focused on what we should keep our minds focused on, then it will have no effect upon us. So, pornography, it is addicting. Like drugs, like alcohol. It begins with letting the eyes wander and take in a seductively dressed woman or man. One's mind begins to wander. An image and lust is born. Then that lust needs to be fed. The lust is no longer satisfied with so-called sexy clothing. It, like a fire, needs more fuel. So next comes the nude pictures and videos. And of course today, there's the internet, folks, with everything on it. And the fire of lust just keeps growing and growing and growing. Now, the internet, although it may be, like many other things, created for a good purpose, it is also used for evil things. It has become, for some, an instrument to meet anonymous people, like themselves, who are searching for more fuel to feed their lust. These people are found in chat rooms and instant messaging, you know, and all these different social media networks. They spend hours searching for their next partner and feeding this lust and desire. This searching takes away time from the family and spouses, which time could, time which could otherwise be used for constructive and good purposes. Their lust can no longer be sustained on cybersex and pictures, or when it can't. It needs something new. It needs more fuel. Instead of chatting to feed the lust, the chats becomes plans to meet another person. These meetings sometimes become affairs, and the destruction is complete. And worse yet, this is how a lot of young girls and women get murdered by pedophiles seeking their new victims. This all begins from allowing your eyes and mind to lust after the body beautiful. Now, the body is beautiful. But I say that in a sense that we were created in the image of God, and in the sense of the complicated process that occurs to sustain our life, for that is an awesome thing. I have no doubt that the Father and Christ have beautiful bodies, spiritual bodies. And when we are young, you know, when we were young, we had beautiful bodies too, didn't we? When we were young. But we're physical. And these old physical bodies, after a while, they begin to fade. They begin to fade into something else. So in one sense, the body is a work of art, but not the kind of art spoken of by these delusional-minded people. Nudity is for people who are in love in the privacy of their own homes. Well, if it's not art, then it must be educational. Right? Well, it is educational, but it's the wrong kind of knowledge and education. Through pornography, we have learned to pervert the concept of true sexuality. Men have been taught that a woman is nothing more than a human body to use in order to fulfill their desires, their sexual desires upon. Men have been taught that a woman is nothing but an empty shell without spirit or character. And young women today are being taught the same thing about men. Men are just something to be used. Oh yes, pornography will give you an education. But the question is, can we afford to have young men and women running around with this kind of thinking or that kind of knowledge? The act of lovemaking is something which was never meant to be exploited. It was to be reserved for a man and a woman in love in the privacy of their own bedrooms, not something to be viewed by the whole world to see. And this exploit excuse me, of the human body is a great American tragedy. As a matter of fact, it's a worldwide tragedy. Pornography reveals what little value we place on the precious private gift of true love. It has brought something precious and God-given down to the level of common smut. Excuse me. Many women, and men too, by their own inwardness, expose themselves to the whole world to see, thinking themselves to be so beautiful and more important and more highly of themselves than they ought. Take Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah was a XXX rated reality show acted out in real life every day. So what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 1:9, if you want to jot that down, is oh so true. He says, the thing that has been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. So, pornography has always existed, ever since the fall of mankind to sin. Now, we know when the Bible speaks of Sodom and Gomorrah, it is speaking of homosexuality. However, Carolyn J. Dean, this is a woman, wrote a book. In her book, entitled The Frail Social Body, Pornography, Homosexual and Other Fantasies, she quotes, she says, the legal history of homosexuality will demonstrate that homosexuality has almost always been conflated with pornography and public indecency. So that's the reason you have a lot of homosexuality. So homosexuality and pornography are intertwined. They go together. And it somehow makes people proud to be and do what they do. Ezekiel 16:49, we read, speaking about Sodom, or of Sodom. It says, behold, this was iniquity of your sister Sodom. He was comparing Sodom as being a sister to the ancient Israelites. He said, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. That's us today, folks. That's us right down to a T. We've got plenty to eat. We've got plenty of free time. We're so in tune with in our own little worlds. We don't have time to help people who are more unfortunate than ourselves. And we're so proud, aren't we? So proud of who we are. We're so proud to be a nation which sanctions same-sex marriages in every state. We're so proud of that, especially the ones at the very top. But what are the dynamics which make up pornography? It's important that we understand. There's a story in the Bible which gives us these dynamics. It is the story of a woman who was caught in the act of adultery. First, there was the man whose face was never shown. As a matter of fact, he was never even mentioned. He was a man who would not accept responsibility for his actions. He was the perpetrator of the crime, using the woman only as an object for self-gratification. And again, his face was never shown. Then you have an audience. Men who put all these women on public display. Now, I know the Pharisees didn't put this woman on public display for the sake of pornography. They were just trying to trick Jesus on the point of the law. But it still shows us that the dynamics. Then you have the woman, or you have women, I'm sorry. You have women wondering why they can't get any respect. The dynamics of pornography consist of three things. You have a man who desires sexual gratification without commitment or responsibility. To him, women are nothing more than an object for this sexual gratification. Then you have the audience. You have men, for the most part, for men have always been the biggest purchasers of pornography. But there's women also who buy it. You have these men who view women as the lowest class on the earth. To them, the woman only exists for no other reason than to fulfill the desires of men. The woman is viewed as something which can be discarded once she has fulfilled her only duty. And there are some women who think of men on this same line of thought. But then you have the woman, a person without any self-respect. Women of pornography have lost all sense of self-respect. They think they are ruling and controlling men. For it is the desire of some, not all, but some women desire to rule over, which you have associated with this sin of pornography. But the very opposite is true. It is the man who has the power over the woman in relation to pornography, by demanding that she not disrespect herself. To demand that she respect herself to the point of, because eventually she has lost all respect for herself through pornography, to the point of becoming non-existent. Pornography is mostly a man's problem, and the only thing which will bring pornography to an end is when men start demanding that women respect themselves and will settle for nothing less. That's the only way to stop it. Pornography exists because it is a man who hides his face from his God-given responsibility and duties, like the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery. It was the man who refused to show his face. It was the man's refusal to admit he was the reason for all this mess. It is caused by the man who refused to use his power to demand that every woman respect herself. So, just how destructive could pornography be? Is it really a big deal to look at a little pornography to liven up your life? After all, you're not actually committing physical adultery or fornication, are you? It's just a movie or a magazine. Men and women too say about their mates, I promise them my heart, not my eyes. So, nothing wrong with it. Well, folks, your eyes are also a part of your heart when it comes to thoughts and actions. Thoughts become actions. Actions become habits. Habits become your character. And your character determines your destiny. Let's take a look, a real story of a man, as far as we know, accidentally looked at something he shouldn't have, which led not only to adultery, but murder as well. And you already know where I'm going. It's the story of King David. King David, a man after God's own heart. The story is in 2 Samuel, chapters 11 and 12. And since we don't have time to read 2 whole chapters, I'll paraphrase. King David was out walking on the top of his roof, the roof of his palace one evening. And the roofs of that time and that culture were flat. And he saw something which undoubtedly made his heart beat a little faster, I'm sure. He saw this beautiful woman bathing on top of her roof. And I've always been convinced personally that her being there at that time was no accident. I think she probably knew, although I have no proof, that the king always came out on his room or roof every evening, maybe to pray or meditate. She knew he was going to be there. So he sent for her, and he had an affair with her, even though she was married. And so was he. This led to her becoming pregnant. To cover up his sin, he had her husband put on the front line battle lines so he would purposely be killed. So you have murder and adultery, all from looking at a nude woman. Just one time, in this case. All this was done by a man that truly believed in God. He was described as a man after God's own heart. But he was the king, and he had power to do whatever he wanted to do. So power and pornography are a dangerous combination. It's been said that every time a rapist or a child molester has been arrested, the police always finds in their cars, their homes, or wherever they find pornography. Always. How many of you know who Ted Bundy was? For those of you that don't know, he was a serial killer back in the 80s who raped and killed at least 28 women and children, young women and children. They know of at least 28, may have been more. And he wasn't some bum on the street. He was a good-looking law student who grew up in a good home. He described his parents as dedicated and loving parents, and himself as being one of 5 brothers and sisters. He said his parents didn't drink, they didn't smoke or gamble, and there was no abuse or fighting in their home. It was a good home that he grew up in. In an interview with psychologist James Dobson just before he was executed on January 24th, 1989, he described the agony of his addiction to pornography and how it led to the terrible things which he did. He explained how when he was 13 years old, he discovered, quote, dirty magazines in a dump near his home. He was instantly captivated by them. So in time, Bundy became more and more addicted to violent images in the magazines and videos. He got his kicks from seeing women being tortured and murdered. When he tired of that, there was only one place his addiction could go, from fantasy to reality. Now, this interview it's a quite lengthy interview, and we can't read it all. But as you read this interview, you see it was his purpose to warn society of people like himself. That was his last interview and last words. He said, "I'm not asking for forgiveness, for I deserve certainly the most extreme punishment society has to offer. And I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me. That's for sure," he said. What I hope comes out of our discussion is that I think society deserves to be protected from itself as well. As we've been talking, there are forces at loose in this country, he said, especially this kind of violent pornography, where on one hand, well-meaning people will condemn the behavior of Ted Bundy, speaking of himself. He says, while they're at war with people like me, they're walking past a magazine rack full of the very kinds of things that send young kids down the wrong road to being like me. That's the irony, he says. He says, I'm talking about going beyond retribution, which is what people want of me. You know, people wanted him killed, and he deserved to be killed. He says, there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain. He said, I deserve to die, but killing me is not going to bring them back. He says, there are a lot of other kids playing in the streets around this country today who are going to be dead tomorrow and the next day, because other young people are reading and seeing the kinds of things that are available in the media today. And he's exactly right. Even though he was what he was, he understood the root cause of how he and many others become what they are, what they do become. Dr. Elizabeth Holland, a pediatrician in Memphis, Tennessee, says this, speaking of sexually abused children. She says, I'm a doctor. I can suture lacerations. I can put Band-Aids on wounds. I can put on ointments, and I can give antibiotics. But I cannot heal the damage that has been done to these children who have been abused by those who feed on pornography. She says, I cannot erase the hurt and the bewilderment and the fear in their eyes, the eyes of those that have been affected by pornography as it exists today. And yet the perpetrators the perpetrators of pornography want to bring it into my living room and into your living room and into the living room of everyone in this nation. For a few dollars, anyone who wants to plunk down a few dollars and feed on the sickness and disease and decay, you know, that's what she's saying these people wants to do. She says, I can't treat the effects. I can't treat these children who have been abused. The damage is done. And it is done by pornography, by people who feed on it. Our children's minds are being destroyed by these people who feed on pornography, folks. It leads to extremely evil things. According to statistics on pornography, there are thousands of deliberate links on the internet from favorite children's characters to porn sites. Now, what I'm saying is if a child was to click on a link on the internet, such as maybe SpongeBob or Pokemon or Superman or you know some of their favorite characters, when they click on that, it draws them to a pornographic website. It's set up that way. These people set it up that way. So, and when these innocent children search out his or her favorite characters, they end up at a pornographic website. And all of this is done intentionally to get your children hooked and addicted on pornography as early as possible. The more people they can get addicted to pornography, it means more money. And a lot of this is our own fault. A lot of this is our own fault. For children that young, shouldn't have access to the internet in the first place. But it's a good babysitter, is it not? In Matthew 18, 1 through 7, Matthew 18, 1 through 7, Christ speaking to his disciples about the frame of mind we must have to be converted and to be in the kingdom of God, and also how we are not to purposely offend anyone. That's the subject here. He took a little child and placed him in the midst of them and said, except you be converted and become as a little child, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Verse 6, he says, but whoso shall offend one of these little children which believe in me, And I know he's not talking only about the little children specifically here, but about people who may be new to the truth, or people who are humbled by the Word of God, whosoever they may be. But neither does he exclude the little children here either. They are included as well. Christ says it would have been better for him that a millstone were hanged around his neck, and that he were drowned in the depths of the sea. The emphasis, I believe, is people who prey on the helpless, innocent ones of our society, children or adults, and cause them to sin would be better off dead. And for what it's worth, that's my opinion too. The internet is a powerful tool when it is used for good. It has a lot of worthy and educational sites. And I don't know what the business world would do without it today. Any business today which is not internet oriented will find itself left in the dust. That's a fact. Even little small businesses. There's a fella in our hometown over there. He has this little business out there. He sells parts for small engines, lawnmowers, weed eaters, chainsaws, and he does a really good business. He's been in business for a long time. And reluctantly, he finally had all his stuff, the computer put in and all this stuff, where he didn't like it, you know. He didn't like to do it that way, but he had to. He could no longer just call in an order and have the companies to send him such and such stuff, for they were set up on the internet, and he had to be too. He couldn't do that any longer. They required that he put it on the internet and send it to them. That's the way he had to place his order. He couldn't call in anymore. They wouldn't accept calls. So he was complaining about that. But as I've already mentioned, anything which was created for good has always been used for evil. Everything always has its dark side, it seems. The internet is a marvelous tool for good, but it can also be used by evil people to prey upon those who lack the character to close their eyes and to, you know, they just can't close their eyes to the mind-destroying properties of the internet. It's there and they've got to look at it. I looked up a site called Family Safe Media on the internet, and it gave some statistics on pornography. Now, these statistics were for 26, almost 10 years ago. So you can imagine how they must have escalated since then. But it said that the pornography industry at that time was $57 billion worldwide. And $12 billion of that was here in the United States. Worldwide, there's $20 billion in adult videos, $11 billion in escort services, $7.5 billion, not millions, but billions in magazines, $5 billion in sex clubs, $4.5 billion in phone sex, $2.5 billion in cable pay-per-view, $2.5 billion on the internet, and $1.5 billion on CD-ROMs, I believe. $1 billion in novelties and $1.5 billion in miscellaneous stuff, all in billions. It said child pornography generated $3 billion annually, and that porn revenue is larger than all combined revenues of all professional football, basketball, and baseball franchises. That's here in the United States it's talking about. That porn revenue exceeds the combined revenues of ABC, CBS, and NBC, which is, or was at that time, $6.5 billion. And I'm sure it's much more than that now. There are 4.5 million pornographic websites, which accounts for 12% of all websites. There's 372 million pornographic pages on the web. The daily pornographic search engine requested 68 million, which is 25% of all searches requested. That's 1/4, folks, of all the searches on the internet. That just blew my mind. I couldn't believe that. 2.5 billion daily pornographic emails, which accounts for 8% of all emails sent. 1.5 billion monthly pornographic downloads. 35% of all downloads. Child pornography requested daily was 116,000. Websites offering illegal child pornography, 100,000. You know, and here's another one that blew my mind. It said 89% of all sexual solicitations of youth were made in chat rooms on the internet. So we can see what a powerful tool the internet is for sexual predators. 89%. Worldwide visitors to the pornographic websites annually, 72 million. Average age of the first internet exposure to pornography, 11 years old. Largest consumer of internet pornography, 12 to 17-year-old age group. It's no wonder the children are the way they are today. It's what they see. 90% of children from 18 to 16 years old have viewed porn online. 90%. Most while doing their homework. 20% of men admit to accessing pornography at work. U.S. adults who regularly visit internet pornography websites, 40 million. And the list, you know, it just goes on and on and on. When you break it all down, it says 72% of all males and 28% of females are regular visitors to pornographic websites. 72% of males. When I read the statistics on all of this, it just blew me away. I couldn't believe it. I didn't realize to the extent how deep people, you know, worldwide and in the United States were wrapped up in such stuff. And, by the way, the United States is the biggest producer and promoter of pornographic material in the world. I want to read you an excerpt from a book. The name of the book is The Case Against Pornography. And this book, it's a collection of essays and articles by different people, psychologists, educators, and writers, and sociologists. It says, in 1953, 1 year before I was born, Hugh Hefner first published Playboy magazine. America, says before that time, America was not plagued with somebody's wife or daughter being forcibly raped every 6 minutes. Our children were not being abducted from our parks and schools and playgrounds, which, you know, many were found later sexually molested and murdered. It says we were not plagued with 1.5 million missing children every year. Our teenagers were not conditioned to accept promiscuous lifestyles. We were not plagued with a tidal wave of teenage pregnancies. We were not plagued with an epidemic of venereal diseases like herpes, and we were not faced with the ticking time bomb we call AIDS. We were not plagued with a 300% increase in teenage suicide. And today, we are. Before that time, we weren't. But when that was introduced, all of these things, bad things, began to happen. So, they asked, could it be then that pornography is one of the main reasons why America is plagued with the problems we have today? The facts reveal, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it is. When a bad seed is planted, it produces more of the same. But what about the law? Is there no law against pornography? Well, yes, there is. The First Amendment gives us protection as to the freedom of speech and expression. But the Supreme Court has constantly held that the First Amendment does not protect certain classes of material, including those declared legally obscene. In the case of Roth versus U.S., the court said obscene materials were not protected by the First Amendment. Defining obscene as being material portraying lustful ideals or desires, and material that is tended towards exciting lust, lasciviousness, and lewdness, which of course means to be vile or vulgar. So if there are laws against it, and the courts have upheld that there is a law against it, why do we see so much of it? One reason is the courts are inconsistent. One court may rule something is obscene, and another court may rule that it's not obscene. They just go against one another. Because the definition of the word obscene has changed over time. Our lawmakers today believe in what they call a living constitution, one that changes with the times and the whims of the people. And we see that today. We just saw a good example of that when the Supreme Court of our land legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states. The whims of the people who cried hard and loud enough finally got the results that they wanted. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, I don't know if he's still a Supreme Court justice or not, but he stated he could not define obscenity. Supreme Court justice said he could not define obscenity, but he knew it when he saw it. Here you have a person in the highest court of the land, and he can't define what's in the Constitution. That's what he's there for. That's what he's supposed to be doing, but he said he couldn't define it. When I run across a word that I don't know the definition of, what do? I go look in the dictionary. Could he not have done the same? He should have done the same. One reason why there is so much pornography in the land is our lawmakers can't define what it is. Therefore, you have confusion. 1 Corinthians 14:33 tells us God is not the author of confusion. God has a set standard of law. And that set standard of law is revealed to us by the 10 Commandments, His statutes, and His judgments. However, our lawmakers today refuse to incorporate these standards in the laws of the land, of those that we have to live under. And that is why we are in the shape we're in, folks. Another reason we have so much pornography today is that people in charge of enforcing the laws don't put it very high on their agenda. The police and the prosecuting attorneys. Because, you see, there's more money to be made in enforcing other things. Writing out tickets if you're going 5 miles over the speed limit. There's money in that. Making sure you buy that building permit if you want to build a tool shed behind your house. Got to keep everything up to community standards. But they could care less about moral standards. And there's more money in enforcing the drug laws, where they can confiscate your home, your car, and everything else you have. And I'm not saying it's not important to uphold the drug laws, for it certainly is. It's just that they place more importance on these things because that's where the money is. So why is there so much pornography, if indeed there are laws against it? It's simple. It's what the people want. And the people who don't want it aren't willing to do anything about it. Jeremiah 4:23 tells us this. 4:23, Jeremiah. It says, "They are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge." And Jeremiah 8:12 also, he says, "Were they ashamed when they had committed abominations?" No, he said, they weren't ashamed, nor did they even know how to blush. And that's us today. We do all these things and we just view it as common practice. Don't even know how to blush. See. Let's go to Romans. Romans 1:26. Now, it's speaking of homosexuality here, but what it says can also apply to pornography. For God doesn't choose between sins, folks. For both fill the mind with evil, and if you fill your mind with evil, then what comes out of your mind will be evil as well. Starting in verse 26 here. It says, "For these cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burning in their lust one towards another, men with men, working out that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meat, or which was fit." And I've got marked in my margin there, of course, it says, well, I put it there, it says AIDS, and that's, that's where, that is their recompense for what they're doing. Also back in Genesis 6:5, if you want to jot that down. I'm not going to turn there, I have it written down here. Genesis 6:5, it says, "God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." And as we know, because of the wickedness of man in that time, God destroyed everything in that age, with the exception of Noah and his family. Do we think today that we can escape for doing a lot of the same things? No, folks. God is going to once again exact his vengeance upon this evil world. It says in Malachi 4:1, "For behold, the day comes that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yes, and all that do wickedly, shall be stubble. And the day that comes shall burn them up, says the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root or branch." Therefore, folks, we in the church should pray always for the protection of God. And this is not just some story, people. This is reality. This is facts. So remember, if you let Satan get inside your mind, he's not going to be satisfied with just letting you be a bystander. He can get in there. He will drive you to take your fantasy to the next level, until you eventually become a participant in acting out evil things. That's what pornography does. And when you reach that level, it's almost impossible to turn back. So turn to God before it's too late. Of course, that applies to all our sins. For God is the cure to all sins. We can't do it by ourselves. We need the power of God living in us. And if we allow that power to live in us and lead us in life, if we use that power then we can resist the devil and all his evil ways. Pornography is one of the biggest vices that the devil uses today to get at people and to destroy people. But we can overcome sin, whatever that sin may be, if we allow the power of God to live in us.